Welcome to this edition of the Head to Head podcast. I'm your host, Cam McKinney. This is the 29th episode of the podcast, and in this edition of the podcast, I'm going to talk about all things Josh McDaniels. There have been some interesting hires in the NFL this past offseason, or this current offseason really, and a lot of them have been offensive names. Cliff Kingsbury, you have Bruce Arians, so many guys over and over again. One defensive guy in Denver. There was one guy left out of the bunch, Josh McDaniels, who last offseason was offered the head coaching position of the Indianapolis Colts to coach Andrew Luck, who this season is coming off an almost MVP-like season. But Josh McDaniels says no, not knowing how Andrew Luck was going to react with his health and where he was. He hadn't thrown a football in almost a year and a half. I mean, that was a long time for Andrew Luck to not play football. But what is Josh McDaniels doing to me is so interesting and confusing, and a lot of people believe he's the next New England Patriots head coach. He's the offensive coordinator of the New England Patriots, for those of you who don't know him. He's been the offensive coordinator for the majority of his career since 2005. He had a 1 year and a half stint as the head coach of the Denver Broncos that ended miserably. Josh McDaniels got caught with his own mini Spygate, ended up losing his job. It wasn't even that bad of a stint. I mean, this isn't Hugh Jackson 1-31 in 2 years in Cleveland. Josh McDaniels won 6 games the first year and 4 games the second year, and he didn't even finish out the second year. So it's not like this is the same situation of like he should never be given a second chance. I mean, a lot of people think of it as like most head coaches do better their second chance. Bill Belichick was the head coach of the Browns for 4 years, but he wasn't good at all. And then he got his chance in New England, and he's had 18 years of success. With McDaniels, he hasn't been given his second chance, nor has he taken his second chance. He was given his second chance by the Colts, but he said no. But there must be an agreement in place for him to be the next head coach of the New England Patriots. Or what was the whole point of this thing with McDaniels? Does he just want to be an offensive coordinator? Does he not care about the title of head coach? Does he not want the glory of winning a Super Bowl as a head coach? There's a part of me that appreciates that he doesn't want to be the head coach of a team that's bad, because he knows that that's just going to be a quick fire, and then maybe he's missing out on the opportunity to win Super Bowls in Tom Brady's back end of his career, which is what he's trying to do right now. And he's won 2 Super Bowls with Brady as his quarterback, and he went to 2 others where they should have won those games. I mean, Josh McDaniels was the offensive coordinator of the best offensive football team I've ever seen, the 2007 Patriots. Randy Moss, 22 touchdowns. Tom Brady, 49 passing touchdowns. Insane numbers. Insane. Those two were insane that season. Tom Brady, you can't deny this fact. Josh McDaniels does not get enough credit for the development of Tom Brady. Tom Brady was thought of as a system quarterback before 2004. Yeah, 2004 was probably the year it was like Brady starting to do well. But when Josh McDaniels gets there, then the numbers start to happen. Then Brady starts to have more like Peyton Manning-like numbers. I don't think Josh McDaniels gets enough credit for the Charlie Weiss Tom Brady is so different than the Josh McDaniels Tom Brady. And the Josh McDaniels Tom Brady is the one who can have the comebacks, have the huge stats, have 500 passing yards in a Super Bowl. I mean, that gets overlooked in the grand scheme of things. That Josh McDaniels is really there for MVP Brady. All of his MVPs are with Josh McDaniels as his offensive coordinator, and Josh is, he was heralded as the next thing. He got his chance in Denver, but I don't think he gets enough credit for the overall development of Tom Brady and how Tom Brady has become better, has become the best quarterback of all time. Would Tom Brady be the best quarterback of all time without Josh McDaniels? I also think Bill Belichick gets too much credit for the development of Brady. There's a Charlie Weiss and Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, that won Super Bowls but wasn't a stats guy. He was kind of like the Derek Jeter of football. And then Josh McDaniels comes in and he becomes like the A-Rod of football. He puts up the huge stats and he wins. he was putting up Peyton Manning-like numbers in 2007. Starting that year is when we really saw the Tom Brady that we're used to seeing. I mean, this past season, we got 25 touchdowns and 11 picks from Brady. That's, to me, more of the early Brady. I think Brady's regressing back to his earlier stages of his career. But Josh McDaniels really helped Brady get put on the map as this MVP, the GOAT, if you will. I don't know if Brady is the GOAT without Josh McDaniels. And I don't think Josh McDaniels ultimately gets the credit that he deserves with a bunch of these guys. He's also, no other offensive coordinator has to deal with all these players leaving because their teams doesn't want to pay those guys. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think other teams had to deal with so many changes at the wide receiver position or so many changes at the running back position. I think Josh McDaniels does it brilliantly. Whether it's Deion Lewis, whether it's James White, I think he's just really good at coming up with plays for those guys. And he's also taken advantage of Gronk. I think he's been the offensive coordinator for Gronk most of his career. I mean, he's Gronk. He's taken advantage of the fact that he has a Gronk or an Edelman, or he's developed some of these guys. I hate this whole Bill Belichick is the master and these other guys are all the puppets. I think there's a reason Brian Flores is getting looked at by Miami, and I think there's a reason Josh McDaniels was in the head coaching game for all those years, being looked at as maybe the next head coach of these franchises. Josh McDaniels, to me, though, is an interesting case because is he just the next in line, or does he just have zero interest in coaching, being a head coach at all? And that's the surprising thing. I 100% believe that Josh McDaniels is going to be the next head coach of the New England Patriots, but there's a little part of me who's like, I don't even know if this guy wants to be a head coach anymore. Maybe he just loves making offensive play calls and he doesn't want to be an offensive coach. There's no glory in being a head coach. If he got the job in Green Bay, which he was interviewing for, he just becomes Mike McCarthy, who calls the plays, and then Aaron Rodgers will have arguments with. I think ultimately the head coach is not your friend, but the offense coordinator, I think he can become closer to a Tom Brady because there's not as much pressure for the wins and losses. When the wins and losses matter, you get the Josh McDaniels who's in Denver trying to win football games with Kyle Orton, and it doesn't work out. I think that's ultimately what ends up happening when you're the head coach. I think when you're the offensive coordinator, you can be the best friend of Tom Brady. You can be the best friend of Julian Edelman, but I don't think a head coach necessarily needs to be the friend of the player. I think the way Bill Belichick and Tom Brady's relationship is, I think it's the perfect kind of head coach quarterback. I think he respects him and he respects him, and they understand how good they are together, but they also understand that, you know what, we're not the best of buddies. It's not the best thing. It's not necessary for us to be the best of friends. And I think that's where maybe Josh McDaniels' fault is. I don't know. Does he want to be a head coach at all? I just don't really understand where he's coming at with this head coaching thing. Last offseason, he takes the head coaching position with the Indianapolis Colts, and reportedly he has a meeting with Robert Kraft, who offers him more money, and he decides to stay with the New England Patriots. There must be an agreement in place for him to be the next head coach. Or does Josh McDaniels just want the money and to just stay an offensive coordinator? I think there's a lot of things that are puzzling about the whole situation that happened last year. Another interesting little tidbit in that is that Bill Belichick didn't seem to care whether or not Josh McDaniels comes back or not. I don't really feel like Bill Belichick cares who his offensive and defensive coordinators are. Matt Patricia got a head coaching job. All these guys. Brian Flores looks like he's the next head coach of the Miami Dolphins. You would think, though, that Bill Belichick would care at this point of Tom Brady's career that he keeps the same guy around and they can build an offensive system that can win Super Bowls. Clearly, Josh McDaniels is the guy. He's the guy. He's had the best run with Brady. He's had the best run in franchise history. He's the best offensive coordinator in franchise history. I don't even know what that really means. We could argue with Charlie Weiss, but I think those teams were winning because of their defense and Romeo Crennel more so. The Josh McDaniels run, they haven't even had a really good defense other than that Super Bowl with Darrelle Revis. I think that team had a really really stellar defense. But, I mean, all this time he's been offensive coordinator. They had the 2009 Patriots had a terrible defense. 2007 Patriots were an aging defense. He's never had the perfect defense, so he's had to build an offense that can score 30 a game and win Super Bowls, and that's difficult. And he's done it twice. I mean, that comeback against Atlanta, I give him a lot of credit for. The comeback against Seattle, he's really good at managing the offense. And I think that would, I mean, in a world where so many of these guys are getting head coaching positions, Cliff Kingsbury or Josh McDaniels, I would rather have Josh McDaniels. I just don't know why Josh McDaniels was not interested in the Arizona job. He didn't seem interested in the Cleveland job. I think he wants to be the coach of the very best quarterbacks. He interviews for the Packers job. He doesn't take the job because he's not offered the job. So I think where Josh McDaniels' mind and head is that he wants to be the next head coach of a team that has a great quarterback. I think he would go to Atlanta if that job ever opened up. I think him and Matt Ryan would be a good fit. I think he would go to that team that has the maybe an older quarterback who's great. I think he would have taken the Colts job if Andrew Luck were 100% healthy. But because he wasn't, he didn't take that job. I think what would be so fascinating is if Josh McDaniels becomes the head coach of the New England Patriots and he gets Tom Brady for 2 or 3 years as the head coach. I think that would be really interesting. I think Brady ultimately would want that. I think it's no surprise that the relationship between him and Belichick is ice cold at this point. Why would he not want his best friend to be the head coach? I think he would allow more access to his weird trainer friend, and they would all... It would be like buddies, him, Edelman, McDaniels, Brady, Alex Guerrero. They'd all be best friends. I think that would be the best case scenario for Josh McDaniels, is to be the head coach of the Patriots and have 2 or 3 years of Brady and try to win. But in that scenario, you ultimately need Bill Belichick to retire first, and a lot of people don't see that happening. I mean, this is like the Cold War. Who's going to retire first, Brady or Belichick? Who knows? But I think ultimately, Josh McDaniels must want to be the head coach of the Patriots only if Brady is there. I don't see McDaniels wanting to be the guy who drafts the next guy. This is the same guy who, he drafted Tebow and he wasn't even there to coach Tebow. I think he doesn't want to go through that process again of drafting the guy and then not even being able to coach the guy, because he's been fired at that point. I think he doesn't want to be here for the down period that the Patriots are about to go into. Ultimately, we will never truly know why he didn't take that Colts job, but a lot of it probably has to do with the fact he didn't want to live in Indianapolis. His family probably had a huge part in that, and who can blame them? He probably didn't trust the health of Andrew Luck. Again, I can't blame him. Andrew Luck had not played football in a year and a half. No one could have predicted the season that Andrew Luck was about to have, not even Josh McDaniels. There's so many interesting... him and Baker Mayfield, to me, would have been a really good, interesting duo. Again, they hire Kitchen, their offensive coordinator, to be their head coach. It's a good hire, but Josh McDaniels would have been an interesting hire for the Browns. I think a part of this that nobody's talking about is that second chance is probably scary to Josh McDaniels because of how bad the first one went for him. He knows it's his last chance. It's like in most things in life, if you failed the first time, it's sometimes hard to get back up again. It's not like riding a bike if you were bad at riding a bike. If you fell off the bike once, you're not going to want to ride the bike for a little bit. He was used to winning, and then he becomes the head coach of the Broncos. Then he got cheat. Most people forget this little tidbit, the Spygate, mini Spygate, with the Broncos getting caught doing the things with the cameras also that the Patriots got caught with. Josh McDaniels, I think what happens to these Patriot coaches when they become head coaches is they try to imitate Bill Belichick, and they're not Bill Belichick. He needs to be himself, which I think he's probably learned. He needs to relax, and you try to imitate Belichick. You be cold to the media. You try to get away with things like he tried to get away with. I don't think it's ultimately going to work for a guy like Josh McDaniels. I think so many of these guys, none of the Bill Belichick coaching pool have been great head coaches. Romeo Crennel is the one guy who had a winning season as a Belichick protege. Again, Mike Vrabel really doesn't count with the Titans because he's a former player. He doesn't count. But his coaching tree, like so many of them, even if you want to count Charlie Weiss in college, none of them have worked out. Matt Patricia, it's not going to work out with the Lions. So many of these guys, they just don't pull it off. Because I think there's this idea that, like, your head coach is teaching you the way. And I feel like Bill Belichick is not a teacher, more so in that he's your boss. He's treating Brian Flores and Josh McDaniels like his employees. He's not their mentor. It doesn't feel like I think he wants them to do well, but I don't think he's, like, teaching them the ways of football. I don't think that's the case with the New England Patriots. I honestly don't think that's the case at all. I think it's the case of, like, an aging quarterback sees a young guy and he's like Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. He doesn't want to teach that guy his job because he knows that guy could ultimately take his job. I think that's probably an interesting relationship that we don't know enough about. How does Bill Belichick ultimately feel about Josh McDaniels? Is he friends? Is it like the Charlie Weiss relationship? Or is he thought of as the young guy who is just really good at an offense that Bill Belichick doesn't care for? Is his relationship with Josh McDaniels a lot like the relationship of Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin? Remember when Lane Kiffin was the offensive coordinator for Alabama? How interesting that was? How Nick Saban treated him like an employee. It was a cold relationship. He yelled at him a lot. We obviously never see Bill Belichick yelling, but I wonder if their relationship is ultimately like that. Because we all know that Nick Saban was once a defensive coordinator for Bill Belichick. We all know that they have the same cold style of coaching and ultimately the same cold style of communicating with people. So I wonder if Nick Saban has picked up more things from Bill Belichick that we ultimately know. I think that there might be a cold relationship there between Belichick and McDaniels. Like, I don't want to teach this young guy how to ultimately steal my job. So what if Bill Belichick does the ultimate move and leaves McDaniels without Brady and with Brian Hoyer, and the Patriots hire McDaniels and McDaniels is stuck quarterback with Brian Hoyer? I mean, that would be the worst case scenario for McDaniels. I think we're at a point where McDaniels is going to have to take that bad job or he's not going to get a head coaching job at all. And I think that's a scary scenario for Josh if he has to coach like a Brian Hoyer bridge year for the Patriots. Because I think he's ultimately afraid of that one bad year. Because you start to think, like, I got to get my wins and losses up. I think ultimately we've seen great second chances, though, from head coaches in other sports and in football. I mentioned Belichick. Doc Rivers, head coach of the Magic, gets his second chance with Boston, wins the title. We've seen it. Terry Francona was a nothing manager for the Philadelphia Phillies and went on to win 2 titles with the Boston Red Sox. There is a history of the second chance guy because you learn not to do the things that you did before. It's human. It's just human logic that you would make mistakes the first time and then you would learn from them. And if you don't learn, then you're ultimately not fit to be a head coach. But I question Josh McDaniels' eagerness and willingness to become a head coach again because, I don't know, it seemed like he was looking for an opportunity to not take the Colts job. So he takes the Colts job, then he's offered money, and then he's like, I guess I'm not doing that. But ultimately, if he wants to be a head coach, he's going to have to take that step. And again, there are so many head coaches I would rather Josh McDaniels than. John Gruden, I would rather Josh McDaniels as the head coach of the Raiders. The Bengals, I would rather Josh McDaniels as their head coach. There's so many places where I think Josh McDaniels could ultimately fit into a spot and become a head coach. I'm ultimately wishing Josh McDaniels well in his next step of becoming a head coach. I think it's got to be with the New England Patriots, but could I ultimately be surprised if it doesn't work out that way because the lineage maybe doesn't work if Bill Belichick spends too much time with the Patriots? I mean, this is a team where we thought Jimmy Garoppolo was the next quarterback and then Tom Brady outlast the young guy. You know, he outlasts his successor. The predecessor outlasts the successor. Could the same thing happen with Brady and McDaniels, I find that dynamic to be the most interesting thing of the two. Is that we saw that from a quarterback to quarterback. Could we see that from coach to coach? Brady not wanting to leave the game to Belichick not wanting to leave the game. That is what's so interesting about Josh McDaniels as the next head coach of the Patriots, or the next head coach anywhere for that period. There's also a part of me that wants to see Josh McDaniels do it without Bill Belichick, because I don't want to rate him against the Broncos job, but I do want to see him be given a quarterback and see what he ultimately can do in his next step to becoming head coach. I am rooting for Josh McDaniels. I think we should all be rooting for Josh McDaniels because second chances, they're interesting. He's won Super Bowls as an offensive coordinator. He's clearly smart when it comes to football, but is he football genius level smart? We soon shall see, I think, whether he's the head coach of the Patriots or somebody else. Thanks again for listening to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McKinney. There will be a new episode of the Head to Head Podcast every Monday on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening.